What is most important to you in your life?
Look, obviously family is the most important, but health is very, very important. And I think it's the most important for everyone. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to give the best of yourself to those around you that you love or you care about, if you're not well, if you wake up not well, it impacts your mood, it can impact your energy levels. I talk simply, like if you get a flu or some kind of a cold or some kind of an infection, you feel miserable when you wake up in the morning. It's not like you're going to walk around with a smile on your face and go like, I'm going to hug everybody and be loving, and you feel miserable, you're frustrated, you're irritated. And I think so that with everything in life, health is actually the underlying factor of determining happiness. There's a saying, not my saying, I mean somebody, there was an expression that I read which says, in order to be happy in life, you need to have hope. But in order to have hope, you need to have health. Without health, there's no hope. With health, only is there hope.
Lekker, ons rol. My gunsteling gesegde is, dis beter om konstant goed te wees as soms uitmuntend.
Toe het ek besef, maar daar's 'n heeltemal 'n ander wêreld, daar's 'n ander dimensie.
It's not like winning the lottery where you put yourself out there and then it happens to you. You have to put yourself out there, but then the hustle starts.
Good. Okay, Mark, I'm going to read an introduction and then we're just going to go through all the questions.
No problem at all.
Is it
100%.
fine?
Yeah.
Okay, he's one of the most respected names. How old are you now?
I'm 53. I turned 54 this year.
Okay, all right. He's one of the most respected names in sports nutrition, endurance fueling, and high performance living. He's a co-founder and CEO of a company called 32GI, a brand that has revolutionized.
I'm not the CEO, by the way. My partner is. Yeah.
Okay, all right. But you're the founder, the co-founder. Okay.
We're co-founders. He's the business guy. I stay in the tech. I stay technical.
A brand that has revolutionized the way athletes fuel their body. He isn't just a businessman. He's also an endurance athlete, certified sports nutrition expert, and a coach who has spent years helping elite competitors as well as everyday athletes optimize their performance. His passion for clean, sustainable nutrition has shaped 32GI into a global recognized brand, trusted by professionals and weekend warriors alike. He's probably the fittest 53-year-old in South Africa, and his slogan is 200 like a 20-year-old. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Wolff. Mark, thank you so much, man. Yes, it is a privilege for me to have you here.
Yeah, we've spoken many times.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, you helped me a lot. I struggled to lose some weight while I was training, and you said, you're the first guy that says, listen, you must go for bloods. Yeah, draw the bloods and see what's going on. And that helped me a lot. So thank you so much. And thanks for being here. When I messaged you, you said, no problem, man. I'm always. Yeah. So thank you so much. Let's start off with your journey in the early years. Where did you grow up? What led you to pursue a career in sports nutrition? And then obviously, just in that story, I just want to, if you can touch on that guy as well. So we'll put this on, that is you at 112 kilograms. You
less than 112. 112 is my peak weight. I think I was probably maybe in the 90s, but okay. It wasn't my peak weight.
You look like a professional wrestler there, man.
More weightlifting. But
yeah. So where did it start?
So look, I was born in Cape Town. I've got, my parents moved to Johannesburg when I was still very young. So I grew up mainly in Johannesburg and, just normal. Went to a Sandringham High School in actual fact, matriculated there in 89. And then I went and studied electrical engineering.
That's far from
sports nutrition, very far from the health and wellness industry, and very far from endurance sport. Mm. And then I landed up, I studied, I worked in the technology industry for a while, and I actually became a security expert. I was an information security consultant and an expert in information security. It's what I specialized in for a very long time. And in my 20s, I fell very ill. I fell very ill in sort of mid-20s. I caught a virus actually from a newborn young daughter.
What?
And I landed up being bedridden for a very, very long time. In actual fact, I had fevers for, I think it went on 2 months. I had severe liver function issues. My immune system wasn't functioning properly, and I went from specialist to specialist, from leading liver specialist to infectious disease specialist to you name it, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. A very good friend, one of my best friends at the time, who was a new physician, managed to diagnose the virus that I'd actually contracted. And he basically said to me, Mark, you need to change your life. Working in a corporate environment, lack of sleep, not exactly focused on my nutrition, and also pushing myself quite heavily, especially with a lot of heavy lifting. I came from a powerlifting or weightlifting background. It wasn't really conducive to health. And, when you fall ill at such a young age, you start to realize, man, I'm so young. You don't want to live the rest of your life like this. So at that stage, I thought, all right, I think the most important thing you can do is to clean up your diet. And I went and I visited a dietitian, and the dietitian was very obese. And I didn't take too well to that, because I'm always of the firm belief that you should practice what you preach. And nothing against the dietitian from a skills point of view or from a point of view of her knowledge. Obviously, she had studied for many years to achieve her qualification, and she'd obviously had a successful practice and was working with people. But it wasn't. But if it's not working for you, then how do I trust it to work for a patient? And I had a few bad experiences with dietitians along similar lines. One even told me, "You're actually eating quite well," but I knew that I wasn't. And I just decided, you know what, this just isn't on. So then I went back to school, back to university, and I studied. I studied clinical nutrition. I studied everything I could possibly study about the human body, physiology, anatomy, went into human biology, and I decided I need to become a complete expert at the human body. And because I was also doing exercise at the time, I also had to try and figure out, how does nutrition shape itself and revolve around your daily exercise regime. And so that's what really set me on that path of going into the direction of being, a sports nutritionist and sort of a human performance expert. I studied blood chemistry many years later. I realized that blood markers were a very, very key principle to understanding health, and looking at health markers, metabolic health. If you're an athlete, you've got to look at the engine as well, see what those performance markers are. And if you can baseline your bloods over many years, you also can pick up anomalies quite easily, but you can also see if there are deficiencies, what you can treat, either from a natural point of view from food or from a supplement point of view. So over many years, obviously, I just kept on developing the skills and the knowledge and carried on studying, and I'm still studying today, and I don't stop studying. You've got to be up to date with science, you've got to be up to date with research, and I'm actually in the process of trying to further my education and get through a doctor's and offering a doctorate in human performance, and that's where I'm headed at the moment. So I think it's just a matter of, this became my passion, and while I was working in the information security consulting side of things, I was consulting on nutrition as well, and helping athletes at the same time, and that was over 25 years ago. And slowly, I started to move more and more into the health and wellness, until eventually, after we launched 32GR, I managed to do the jump completely, cut the corporate industry completely off, and only focus on sports nutrition. And
how did the 32GR start?
So it's a very interesting one. I lived overseas for many years. I came back to South Africa.
Why?
A couple of personal reasons, but mainly because of family support, and And at that stage, my wife and I figured this was the right move, but maybe it was the wrong move. We don't know. You can only look at things in hindsight. But what happened is when I came back to South Africa, and I actually had gotten into mountain biking when I was still overseas. My brother said to me when I'm back, you must come ride 947 at the time. I think the first one I did was a 2001 or 2, and
it was a steel bike.
Actually, in fact, when I was overseas, I asked him to buy me a bicycle. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The first bike I think was a Trek 1000, very heavy chunk of metal, but
7 gears.
So it was a road bike that he bought for me, and so it was ready for me when I came, and I ended up training, and then obviously I started looking at the sports nutrition that was available, and I battled to find clean products. In actual fact, most products that I looked at had weight prohibited substance in, like things like methoxynilamine. There were a few other dodgy substances in some of the products, and I felt that they weren't 100% clean. And obviously coming from, now also the illness that I'd contracted was actually an illness that could flare up again and again and again. And I did get repeating cycles where I was bedridden for a month, or I had fevers for weeks or whatever. Every single year when I sort of hit peak fitness, whatever, this viral infection would flare up and it would hit me again and again and again. So I went through quite a few years of reinfection, and so I had to be very careful about what I put into my mouth. I had to be extremely careful of my sleeping patterns and monitoring my sleep, and also had to be very, very careful as to how I trained. I had to make sure that I really periodized my training properly. I didn't overstress the body too much. You could stretch the elastic band, but you cannot let it snap. You've got to be very careful. So I had to understand what those tipping points were. And so everything I had to manage. But one of the most important things, and where you've got the most control, is what you put into your mouth. So, I always say to people, once it's past your lips, you've lost means of control. The control point is the point of when you pick up that food. And so that's where it started. And I wasn't happy with what I found in the sports nutrition industry here. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. And so I knew a guy in the community who actually was a salmon importer and used to make mayonnaise and tomato sauce. He had a facility in Brakpan, of all places. And I met him. He was a Canadian, actually. And I said to him, can you make me up a sports drink? And at the time, we used like a multi-dextrin blend with natural flavors, natural colors, no nonsense. And it was actually, I remember it was a peach flavor. I actually quite liked it. And then one day he went to a conference overseas and he was introduced to a novel carbohydrate, which is isomaltulose, which is palatinose actually. A German company called Benoit Palatinate actually was one of the biggest producers globally. And he asked me if I wanted to try it out. So I said yes. It was very different to a normal carbohydrate. This carbohydrate, instead of elevating blood sugar, it actually stabilized blood sugar. It didn't create a spike. It actually had a prolonged release over a period of time. And so if it was blended with the right kind of carbohydrates, you could actually really get a nice, amazing stability effect, especially for endurance sport. In endurance sport, you don't want a roller coaster. You want stability. You want those energy levels to be stable. So I tested it out and I was like, this is very different. The feeling's very different. You could feel the difference. And I tested it out over and over again. I thought, this is great. Then I had some friends who were elite athletes, and I dished it out to them, and they kept on asking me for more and more and more. So I thought, hey, these guys are really liking this product. And then it also, because of the stability, it also found that it actually suppressed appetite. If you can stabilize blood sugar levels over a longer period of time, it will suppress appetite or hunger cravings. So I had a lot of women that were coming to me and saying, can they buy the powder? Because they find when they drink it, they don't feel hungry and they're able to curb their excessive appetites. And I'm like, okay, that's also crazy. But
it's a big market.
Yeah, so I had this old Mazda. Financially, I wasn't in a great space. And I thought, hey, I can make some extra money. So I drove around selling buckets of powder out the boot of my car. I was like a drug dealer. It's like,
crazy.
So that's how it started. And then my partner today, who's a friend of mine, Dean, he was actually looking at investing in a sort of a recruitment company, a HR recruitment company, specifically focused, I think, on legal, like lawyers. I think it was a British company, and they were opening up a big franchise here. And he wanted to invest in a business, so he wanted to run his own business. He was sort of a a business broker at the time, and he liked the idea of having his own company. And he had some bad partnerships, and we actually gelled quite well. In actual fact, when I was consulting at Mutual and Federal in the early 2000s as the information security officer of the company, I actually landed his first contract there, which was a security audit. And they didn't have to convince me. The senior auditor of M&F said to me, "Do you approve this?" I said, "I know the technology, worked in it overseas, thumbs up." And there wasn't actually a sales pitch needed. So he was like quite shocked. So that's how we met. And in an elevator pitch downstairs, we realized we were both entrepreneurial. I've actually got a master's degree in business, but with a focus on, it's an MEI degree, Master's in Entrepreneurship and Innovation, which I did through Swinburne University of Technology. I graduated there in, I think, 2002. They offered me to do my DBA, but I was like,
too much.
Yeah, it's a little bit too much at the time. So I had quite an entrepreneurial flair, because when I did my master's degree in business, especially doing the entrepreneurial sort of take on the degree, I found that we worked with a lot of seed and startup companies, and I realized, hey, there's something here that's talking to me on the inside as well. I realized I wanted to work for myself and not with corporate, and I was also enjoying the consulting side of things. So I actually tried to convince him to come into partnership with me. I said, "Why do you want to invest in an HR recruitment company?" I said, "You don't have to wear a suit and a tie. You can come and you can wear lycra, you can stand out in the fields with the mountain bikers or the cyclists." I said, "It's a different life." And he's very risk averse. He really thinks about things very carefully. I'm like a stallion that likes to go run wild in the fields.
Combination is good.
And he's the guy that likes to have a little bit of control in the reins, which is fine, because that's how
it's needed.
It's very needed. And I think in successful businesses, the partnership has to be synergistic. It has to be a blend, There can be a bit of conflict, but you need to be able to complement each other as business partners. I think that's so important. And because he was so risk averse, I landed up having to get references for the product that I was selling out of the boot of my car. And I built up a reference list of dozens and dozens of athletes, what they said, who they were, contact numbers, etc. And over I think a 2 or 3 month period of discussions in that, eventually he said, "Okay, come, you meet with, you need to meet with," it was his girlfriend at the time, who's his wife today, many, many decades later. And his wife was actually a marketing specialist. She thought I was crazy because, going up against the likes of really solid brands like Biogen and USN, the market was very saturated. Who are you to come into a market that's very saturated and even try and take on these big guys? And my thing was, I've just got a different message. Everybody's focused on blood sugar spiking, take as much glucose as you want. But I'm looking at the average Joe, not the podium finisher. Less than 0.001% of people will stand on that podium. Most people, like at Comrades, they just want to finish the Comrades and get to the finish line with a smile on their face, and they'll do it in under the 12 hours. With an Ironman, they just want to get to the finish line. Not everybody's going to go sub 10. And so, that's actually the bulk of the market, and those are the people that we wanted to speak to, because we were focused on health. To empower performance, not focused on performance. The health aspect was the most important for us. So eventually, after much convincing and discussions, we agreed that we're going to try and launch this product. My parents were actually friendly with the owners of Discam at the time, Ivan and Lynette, and my father actually managed to get a meeting and convince the guys at Discam to allow us an opportunity to come into Discam. And Discam said they would start us off in 3 stores, see what would happen. And then I started off in Tony MP Cycles, because I knew Tony quite well. He used to service my bikes. And where his mechanic did, they had a really good mechanic there. And Sweatshop as well. And I think there were 7 stores in total, including those. And my partner and I stood every single Friday, Saturday, and Sunday outside every single one of those stores, like rotating them, serving colored cocktails, which is our Endure today, serving them to people and explaining to them how the product worked for hours and hours and hours. We really, that was for the first year, standing at a little tasting table and serving drinks. and talking and educating. And we realized the more we educated, the more people understood. And then what happened was that so that was 2000 and
that was your first product, Endure.
Endure was our first product, yes. And that was in 2009 we did the development. We launched in 2010. And April will be our 15th birthday in actual fact. So we launched in 2010, and the way we went into it was we actually decided we're going to focus on the runners. No one else was focused on runners. Everyone was focused on cyclists and triathlon. Upper LSM market, more money to spend on sports nutrition. But runners are definitely, we were passionate about the running space, and we felt that this needed some focus. And I love the fact that runners can't carry a lot on them. So we had to really think out the box about convenience of carry and taste and texture. And also, running is a very grueling sport. It puts a lot more impact on the digestive system. There's a lot higher risk of GI distress when you're running. And so it did require a lot more focus, to make sure that the products are really, really suited to runners. If they were suited to runners, they'd be suited to cyclists, triathletes, etc. And it's quite nice because we actually launched the brand sort of officially. We really launched it at Comrades 2010. We partnered with John Hamlet, who's a top Comrades running coach. We partnered with Max Elite, Mr. Price, which is obviously the running team, which is Martin Ngwenya was managing it at the time. And we basically fueled those elite athletes. And with Stephen Mazingi, we took that first year we took 5 gold medals, including the win. And we realized, if these elites can run on the product, then so too can obviously the weekend warriors. And so the interesting thing about that story is you won't believe how hard it was, because 2010 will stick in my mind forever as far as Comrades Marathon goes. We had a tiny little stand at the expo. I'll send you some photos. You can post them on the channel if you want. But we had a tiny little stand at expo. We worked hard for many days. But the key thing is that when we stood outside the sweatshops every weekend, we offered Comrades runners, or anyone who did Comrades, we offered them free seconding en route if they used our product. We would set up tables en route and we would second them. And we ended up getting 100 and something runners actually agreeing to do this. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I contacted Craig Fry, who was managing some of the elites, and he knows Comrades Route very well, and he lives on Comrades Route. And he said, these are your tables. This is where you should set up. So we set up 5 tables en route. Our tables were Ashburton, Boters Hill, and Changa, Pinetown, and then there was one other one. I'm just trying to think where that one is. But basically we set up 5 tables en route, and it was the hardest thing because we finished the expo at about 5 p.m, shutting down our stand, and now we had to fill up about 800 bottles of Endure. We brought all the bottles down in a trailer empty, and we had to fill these things up. We were in that expo hall until about 10 o'clock at night, filling up, running between, the filtered water and filling up the Endure, making sure the servings are correct. 4 of us, my wife, his wife, and the 2 of us sat there in that hall. And then afterwards we had to they wanted to kick us out of the expo. I'll never forget, but we just couldn't go until we finished. Then we had to load all the stuff into a trailer. We got to bed at 12 o'clock at night. We slept for 1 hour, woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning, drove to Pietermaritzburg, fetched volunteers. And then I dropped the volunteers off. My partner went to, he went to the second feeding zone. I was at the first in Ashburton. Can't remember which zone he was at. I dropped off the volunteers at Nchanga. I dropped them off at Boters. I then realized how freezing cold it was in those mountains. So I drove back to a garage. I bought coffee and food, and then I drove back to Nchanga and Boters to give these guys coffee and food because I knew it would be a long time before the Comrades field came through, and I wanted them to stay warm. And then my wife and I went to Ashburton, and we basically we seconded there. And it was freezing. I couldn't believe how cold it was. I hate training in the cold. I prefer heat. And for me, it was terrible. I was sitting there shaking. Anyway, what we did was we gave people tattoos to put on their arms. All they did was they just showed us and we could hand them the bottle. But I didn't realize that thousands of people are going to come running past me at once. So after 15 Ks already in the field, it's still very compressed and no one's going to come past you. And what happened is that, so occasionally a few people missed their feeds, but the minute the person held up their hand, we gave them the bottles. We shut down. We went to Pound Town. Then my partner shut down. He joined us in Pound Town. I went from Pound Town, shut down. I went back to Buertas. We fed. Once Buertas was shut down, we went to Nchanga. We shut down Nchanga. And I told my partner, you shut down Pound Town. I'm going to take the volunteers back to Pietermaritzburg. I fell asleep at the steering wheel. It was like crazy. I nearly had an accident that day. But that's how we actually launched our brand. That was the hardest thing ever. I swore I'd never second again. And I swore that I'd run Comrades the following year. And I did a nice qualifier. I ran a nice A seeding that year. And unfortunately, about 3 weeks out from Comrades, I had a tib post injury, like really quite bad. And I was advised by the sports physician at the time, don't run it. If you run it and that thing snaps, it's game over. So I made the decision to pull out. And then I thought, okay, the next year I'll do it. Ran another A qualifier. Again, I landed up with bronchitis 2 weeks out. And, I'm one that you listen to the body. A lot of runners get emotional, they'll do it. And I thought to myself, no. And then after that, I seconded another 13. Every time I had to pull out, I seconded. And I've seconded 13 times Comrades route. Yeah. Mainly with the elites. So when they had the seconding vehicles on the route, I've sat in the car. We worked with Nedbank for many years. We worked with Max Elite. We've worked with quite a few. We work with Hollywood Bets today. But I think it's a matter of, it's Hollywood Athletics actually. But it's the sitting en route and seconding. That was for me the way to further develop our product and our brand. So I was able to trial and test what these athletes were feeding on the day. So I would hand them a bottle. They would drink it. They would throw it back. I would put a line around it. I'd see how much they consumed, and I would work out what the intake was over their 5.5 or 6 hour run. I'd work out, in terms of carbohydrates. When I introduced protein en route, I realized that there's an amazing it works with protein en route. Then I realized, okay, we need protein and carbs. And then slowly carried on developing our brand with Comrades runners. And so I would say that 32 GI today is being developed on the back of what I think is probably one of the most grueling ultra runs. And it's a road run, so it is high impact. It's not a trail run, but it's probably one of the most grueling runs in the country. And that's really how the brand landed up coming into development. That's how it came into being. And after year, we just became this brand that, Comrades runners loved, specifically ultra runners. And obviously it spilled off into the other areas as well. And that's why it's such a nice sort of, it's come full circle that we partnered with Comrades Marathon for the 2024 Comrades, and we're partnering again for the 2025 Comrades. So for us, it's like it's a closed loop, and we love it. We absolutely love it.
Is that the ultimate race to do in endurance sport? You think?
I don't think it's the ultimate race. They say it's the ultimate human race. I've never done Comrades. I've never run it. I've been told that if you're sponsoring in 2027, there will be a sponsor start, and you expect it to be on the start line. So, I've done some really long distance runs, longer than Comrades. Also some ultra trails and that, which I'm personally not like this biggest fan of ultras because it can be damaging to the body. And I think up to marathon distance is my preference. I would say that depending on what your passion is, what your sports discipline, is, what you're passionate about, ultimately you've got to find that ultimate race. So when I did triathlon for many, many years, the ultimate race for me was Challenge Roth in Germany. That is, to me, the Rolls Royce of triathlon. Some people will say Kona in Hawaii because it is the World Championships, but I thought Roth was just unbelievable. And we actually ended up sponsoring the biggest triathlon event in the world. We were the official nutrition partners of Challenge Roth as well in Germany for 2015, 2016. And in 2016, I actually was told also, you will be on the start line. I was told by Felix Walchhoff, who is his father started it, and unfortunately his father passed away, but the family's taken it over. And I've never seen such passion going to a race. So we had to take on a lot of challenge events in Europe. From a business perspective, it wasn't the wisest. It could have bankrupted us, nearly did. But in 2016, I couldn't believe that I was on the race course. I actually started with Jan Fredina. They made me start in the sub 9-hour group, the elites. I was there next to Jan. I'm like, Yvonne van Vlekken and all these people. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I shouldn't be. I mean, I'm not in this league. But they made me start there. I was hoping to do a really good time. I ended up going sub 10 anyway, so it was a good day out for me. I had a fall, but I had an amazing experience. But the ultimate experience of that day was this tiny little South African company that started off in the boot of a really old 1993 or 4 Mazda with buckets of powder in the boot. I rode under a massive 32 GI arch on Solareberg, which is like the most iconic climb. It's like the Tour de France of climbers in triathlon. And I was thinking to myself, that's crazy. This little proudly South African brand is here on the biggest world stage. And it was just so crazy to see that. So, in a way, it's, yes, I mean, we've had a lot of success with the brand, but it's, when it comes to doing a master's degree in business, people say, what is an MBA, like an MBA, what it stands for, and it's a master's degree in business administration. It's an MBA is like a master bull-s artist, I think. You really actually start to learn about business when you do it, because that's the true degrees, that experience. It's like really, it's the same with anything. The theory is there, but when it comes to practice, that's where the real suffering starts to take place.
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff that you just talked about is nice, but I mean, we just walked in here and you said one of your containers is stuck in the ports, and there's like a small issue on it, and now they're not gonna take the container into South Africa. So that's the stuff,
and it's stressful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a lot of money that's lying there.
Yeah. So there's little things that happen here and there. I don't think it's easy running a business by any means, but I've really got an amazing partner who's very good at the business management side of things, and that does leave me the ability to focus on the technical side of things, which is more product development, and education is so important. We pride ourselves in education. I think if anything, the success of the business has been around educating people properly.
And you guys build the business around physically being there, physically testing. I mean, you saw what the athletes took in. That's a process that's built up over years and years. That's amazing.
We definitely hands-on. I mean, it wasn't just 1 year we stood in store. We went to events. We were at all the mountain bike events. I remember Dean and I standing in Tulbach at a water table for one of the MTN Nissan mountain bike series events at that stage. Freezing cold in the morning in the most beautiful setting, but having to fuel and feed cyclists. And once they went past that water point, we shut it down. We went to another water point. We set it up. It was a lot of hard physical labor, but that grassroots work, is so important because, and I've even realized that today, is that when I go to an expo, it's my opportunity to speak to customers. I want to hear criticism. I want to hear constructive feedback. I want to hear whatever they've got to say, because I don't shut off. I don't, some people say it's my way or the highway kind of thing, or this is what you do. There's no other way to do it. I'm not like that. I'm like a sponge. I soak up all the knowledge and information they're giving me, and it sits in my head and turns around. I've got some AI today to help analyze that. But I really listen to what consumers are saying, and that could be around taste, texture, gut issues, ease of use, carriage. I mean, when we launched our Race Pro gels, it had a screw top.
That's awesome.
And it's an awesome product, but it had a screw top. And I was riding, I test products myself. I was sitting with that thing and I was trying to open a screw top on a bicycle. I'm thinking, this is crazy, man. You can't do this. I mean, there needs to be another way. So what I did at that stage was I took the screw top off and I put Glad wrap over it so that I could just bite into the Glad wrap and squeeze, so then it made it easier. And then I thought, no, we'll make some soft floss so you can dispense it into a bite valve, which worked very well. And then eventually we had a mold made where we can have a clip top. So once the clip top came in, it was like a game changer. But we had to tweak and improve that thing over a period of time to get it to where customers would actually be happy with not just the taste and the texture and the functionality, but the ease of use was so important. And so speaking to the consumers on a regular basis, whether they email us, whether we're standing at an expo, it is so critical to business success, because without understanding what your consumer's unhappy or happy about, you would never know unless you're actually engaging with them directly. So my function is obviously, yes, I work on the technical side of things, but my function is to really sit and speak to consumers regularly and understand what are the likes, the dislikes, how can we further improve ourselves as we go along. Because it's the journey's never come to an end. It's carrying on.
It's awesome. If we move a bit just on personal finance and business growth, how do you manage personal wealth and financial planning on your...
I've always been terrible.
The reason I'm asking you this is most guys that's successful, they flashy and they buy new cars and whatever. You're not that guy.
No.
I mean, you have the same bike. It's on your feet from
108,000 kilometers on that bike.
I mean,
I did get a new bike in December.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So, but it was 14 years, and it was actually, my partner agreed that we could put it as a business expense. Look, I do a lot of marketing shoots and that, so videos and stuff. But it's the first time in 14, 15 years that I've put it.
It's crazy.
I'm not one to, and I've seen it with a lot of friends in that. They buy these $8,000 Canyon time trial bikes, and then they still upgrade the zip wheels and the group sets. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, $8,000. I mean, there's some properties that you can start to look at, for $8,000. So I'll tell you this so from a personal finance point of view, I don't think I was very, very good at managing finances. Obviously once I studied business, and I dropped accounting, by the way, in Standard 8. And then when I did my master's degree in business, I had a Canadian friend of mine who was actually one of the senior members of the Young Entrepreneurs Organization in Canada. At age 19, he had already made millions. It was crazy. This guy knew so much about numbers. So I skilled him up on more the marketing side of things, because I was very good at educating and talking, and that's we worked together quite well as a group. But he really he schooled me so well in accounting principles at that stage. And I actually got involved in sort of investing a little bit in the stock market, mainly the NASDAQ, when I was living overseas, and starting to understand, analyzing financial statements of businesses and, looking at where they could possibly go. And I realized that business success is not just about what happens in just the financial sense of things. There's a lot more that goes into it. I worked for a company when I was living overseas, which in the 90s, we were offered IPO share price, listing price, which was $20 actually. But at the time, $20 wasn't a lot against the rand. And in actual fact, I was actually earning in a foreign currency anyway, so it was even stronger. And I'll never forget, the accountant said, we were offered, we could take up to so many thousand shares, but he said, if you take more than 2,000, they might reject you. So rather just stick to 2,000. Little did I know that the accountant took 20,000 and sold on day one when the share price doubled, went from $20 to $40. I took the 2,000 and I was sitting there, and the share price went to $39. And I was like, no, the share price is going higher. It was the internet boom. And it did. It went to $60 to $70. It went to $104 by April, and it launched in end of Jan. And I'm thinking to myself, $104. I mean, you're sitting with 2,000 shares. You're thinking to yourself, man, this is it. And then we got hit with then we got hit with 2 planes flying into the Twin Towers. A black swan event, which they call it. And the markets just took a dive. And then the company I was working for got hit with $1 billion lawsuit. And the share price took a dive. It went down to $8. And I didn't sell. And I said and everyone sold. People sold at losses, and everyone said, Mark, you're crazy. And I didn't sell. And I sat like really thinking about this. And I thought to myself, the guy that owned our company was Rupert Murdoch, by the way. So, News Corp, he's not he's one of the sharpest businessmen. He's not a stupid guy. Very sharp businessman. The company that was suing us was Vivendi Universal, in actual fact, another media company. And I think the guy, Jean-Pierre Messier, was the CEO at the time. Anyway, the interesting thing is that I just thought to myself, these are 2 businessmen. No one in business likes battles. No one likes lawsuits. And, everybody's got a position of power that they're going to play. And so I went and bought more shares at $8 to bring my average cost down. And I just carried on doing that for a bit. And I told this friend of mine, Jonathan, I said to him, mark my words, they're going to settle this lawsuit and the share was going to, because I knew the fundamentals of the business. I knew that the business was going to climb. And lo and behold, 2 years later, they happened to meet at a conference. He said, you drop the lawsuit, I'll take over your losing pay TV arm in Italy, which was Sky. I think it was, what was it, Stream? We'll merge it with my Sky. We'll call it Sky Italy or whatever it is. And you drop the lawsuit. And he offered him a really good deal, The antitrust legislature approved it. The lawsuit was dropped. The share price shot to $70. And I sold. So I realized sometimes in life you're going to be really down and out. And that was a big learning lesson for me. I think that the biggest thing was learning patience, is not getting emotional about things, because the minute you do, you make mistakes. And I think in business, like, emotions can often make you make big mistakes. And sometimes you've got to take a step back and a step out of the situation and understand what you're getting into. So, I mean, in all honesty, with the 32 GI, I'll go back to that now. But from a personal perspective, I've always realized that, I don't make decisions based on emotion. So you talk about a new bicycle or a fancy car. If you've been through financial difficulty, which I have been, I've really been through severe financial difficulty, you're not going to go and spend on bling. There's just absolutely no ways. I hold back as much. I'd rather invest in long-term sort of funds, or, crypto is quite big. I love it. But I'd rather invest in something that's got long-term growth and know that, that's the way forward, as opposed to investing in short-term, like, joy, which is not going to benefit you whatsoever. Look, if you've got the cash to spend on it, that's great. But I'm not one for doing that. And I'll tell you something else. You talk about fancy cars. We got involved before 32GR. We got involved in a business opportunity with a guy. It was in it was an injection molding business. It was actually in the fruit industry. It was to protect pallets from damage. And I'll never forget once that this guy was a self-made multimillionaire, a really successful businessman. He had worked his backside off to get his business to where it was. And he was hands-on every single day. And one day I went to his facility and I drove in there, and there was an old Merc, like an 80s Merc, sitting there. And I drove in my Mazda. And he said to me, I'm really glad you came in that car. He says, I get people coming here because he had a patent. They wanted to, take his product to market or whatever. I get people coming here in Porsches and Ferraris. He says, those people, the minute I see their cars, he says, their business opportunities out the window. He says, I don't appreciate that. He says, at all. And it was actually quite a learning curve. Learning curve, yeah. So, I'm not one for spending. Yeah. My wife says that sometimes I'm a little bit too frugal, but you know what? When you've been hurt once, like I was hurt with illness, I didn't compromise on my health, my nutrition, my sleep. I don't compromise on that. you get hurt financially, you don't want to go back to feeling that pain again. You're not going to compromise. You're going to hold back. And my partner's the same. He's exactly the same.
There's something that's you're very consistent in your outlook on that. And on your page as well, you posted a post on Instagram, I think, where you said, this marks my 200th week of training. I mean, 200 weeks is 3.8 years.
I'm on 247 at the moment.
250 weeks. I mean,
nearly 250.
that's crazy. And I mean, that speaks louder than everything. You take the same view on finances as you take on your health.
I think that with anything in life, success comes from consistency. You've got to be if you want to be successful at health, if you want to be successful at gaining body composition changes, being great at whether it's cycling, running, swimming, you have to be consistent. You know that in sport they talk about the 10,000 hours. To get there, you've got to be consistent. And I've seen it. I've seen it with training partners of mine, how amazingly they've done, but by standing in, and being consistent every day. I think when it comes to finance or success in business, it's also about consistency.
Show up.
A lot of people think that, like if I look at now where 32GI is today to where it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and even when we started up, because we're 15 years now, there was obviously growth in the first 3 years because it's a new business, but it's not enough to sustain you. It's not enough to, sustain you at all. We saw more growth coming maybe in years 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7 was like, we thought we were shutting our doors. We were ready. Was
it COVID years?
No, it wasn't. It was 2016, 2017. Unfortunately, we had over-invested in the sponsorship in Europe, and it hurt us because our distributors overseas hadn't achieved the sales KPIs that we'd given, and so their KPIs were very much dependent on our ability to support those events, and we had to pull out of those events in order to save the company. We had to go into massive, I'd say, loans, overdraft, whatever it is, and you sit every day stressing. And then eventually you get to 2019 and you're slowly now turning the corner. And then suddenly you get told by government, we're shutting your business down because we're putting you into lockdown. I'm like, oh my.
Wait a minute.
Just when you think you're turning the corner, you get hit with another lightning bolt. And so COVID was a very difficult time for us because they actually took sheets of plastic material and covered our products in every single store, saying that these are not essential items, so you can't sell them. I mean, your whole business is frozen, and it wasn't frozen for a short period of time. So we had to really think out the box now. That's when we developed an online course where I started to do education. We developed an online course, but that's not going to take that. It might bring a little bit of income in. In the end, yes, banks came in and whatever, and they helped some businesses with funding. We got funding, but you have to pay back the funding with interest.
Definitely.
So it was a very difficult period. But COVID allowed us to think out the box. It changed the way we do business. It changed the way we thought about how we need to engage with our customers in that. And we actually used that period to skill ourselves up and educate ourselves. That enabled us to put some really good systems in place going forward. So once COVID had finished, those systems we're still putting systems in place. We're by nowhere near, but that's where the success and the drive comes from, is by actually, it gave us the ability to actually take a back step and say, what do we need to do to the company to now really shift and shape the course of the business? And COVID was that opportunity where we couldn't really go to the office. And the day that my partner said, listen, we have to meet and go to the office, I gave them all COVID because I had it and didn't know it. So when it comes to consistency, I think the important thing is that when it comes to any business, if you want to succeed, first of all, you've got to shut out all the noise and you've got to focus on, you've got a vision, you've got to focus on that vision. And you need to, whatever your mission is, you need to keep driving and sticking to it. I think most businesses fail because people expect success after 3 or 5 years, and then when they don't see it, they give up. But what if you went 6 or 7 years? We went 15 years to start seeing success. 15 years. That's a long time to actually start seeing success. But that just shows you how difficult it is, that businesses are not like, I'm going to have a business and it's going to explode. It's much harder than working for a corporate. The risks are much higher, but you have to get up every single day and you've got to go and do what you have to do.
The COVID, I remember, I think I saw you for the first time when you spoke about COVID and the vaccine and whatever. What was your take on that?
It's such a controversial subject. But I'll share my story. I caught COVID early on. I caught it in May of 2020. It was just after we had gone into lockdown. And it was an unpleasant flu, I wasn't feeling at risk. And immediately doctors knew what to treat you with. It was the prophylaxis at the time was corticosteroids, sort of anticoagulants, so a blood thinner. They would give you Ecotrin, and then I had N-acetylcysteine, which there was some scientific research. It was clinical evidence actually to show that they were using it for treatment. So it's a mucolytic, but I found it really quite useful. So I would double dose on that. I would take 1,200 milligrams a day, but I saw some hospital reports where they were hitting people with 1,200 in the morning, 1,200, 2,400 milligrams a day. And I realized, okay, there is sort of a treatment protocol in place, but nobody was agreeing on things, and doctors were getting into trouble, and government was coming in, and there was so much noise around, and I found that people were emotional and there was no vaccine at that time. But the biggest thing to me was, and this is because I understood blood chemistry, the biggest thing to me was, I've got an immune system. I had COVID. I fought it off. It's a viral infection. My body must have developed antibodies for it. And there wasn't yet there wasn't an antibody test at the time. And I kept speaking to physicians that I know, saying, has SAPRA approved it? Has SAPRA approved it? And then suddenly SAPRA approved it. And I ran antibody testing on myself every single month. And I tested positive for COVID antibodies. I tested positive. Now, the scientists overseas were saying, in 4 to 6 weeks, that's it. Your protection's gone. And I thought, that's not possible. The immune system is so amazing. It's an incredible, incredible system. How is it that after 4 or 6 weeks, it's gone? It doesn't work like that. But you hear the noise from the outside and you start to doubt yourself. So I thought, there's only one word that speaks: bloods. Bloods tell the truth. They don't lie. I went every single month. At month 8, I still tested positive for antibodies. At month 9, I still tested positive. And at month 10, I thought, these scientists don't know what they're talking about. This is crazy. I've got antibodies for 10 months. Here are the bloods. Anyway, then month 11 and 12, I tested positive with antibodies. So I'd had a year of antibodies. And then Delta came. Delta came, and it was vicious. It was a vicious, vicious strain of the virus. And one of the kids picked it up and came home, locked himself in the room and said, I'm isolating. I don't want you to get it. I walked into his room and I said, I want to get it. I want to get it. I said, get out. I said, we've had COVID. I feel like I can trust my immune system. I've been testing positive for antibodies. I caught it. I caught Delta. I had a sinus infection for 48 hours, and then I was fine. While most people were being hospitalized, it was quite severe, that Delta. And I realized that my immune system, just based on the fact that I'd already contracted COVID once, had provided a sense of protection, and it had shown me that with Delta. And then I went overseas. When they finally opened up the airport, I managed to go overseas. I hadn't seen my kids in a while. I flew overseas. And I actually landed up at the airport, and they asked, where did you come from? And I said, South Africa. Well, I actually told them Addis Ababa because I flew Ethiopian. Because I knew if I came from South Africa, I'd be in trouble. Because at that stage, South Africa was like, they've discovered this new strain and everybody's in trouble. And I landed up, they confiscated our passports and they took us to a quarantine hotel. But I'd done my research before, and I realized that, and that was in Israel at the time. In Israel at the time, they were recognizing natural immunity. If you had contracted COVID, within 6 months, you didn't have to go into isolation. You didn't have to go into a quarantine hotel. The problem was I contracted COVID in South Africa, and I landed up there. So I had to prove that I had contracted COVID, and so what I did was I ran all the bloods. I ran antibody testing. I took the positive COVID testing. I took all the bloods, and I made sure it was done through Lancet, because Lancet's an international laboratory. I took it over there, and they locked me up in a hotel, and I had my bicycle with me and my indoor trainer. I took my kicker with me as well, because there's no ways I'm going to be in a hotel. You talk about consistency, and I'm not going to train. I'll never forget one of the military people downstairs, which was that they were managing the hotels, the quarantine hotels, saying, you can leave your bike and that down in the luggage room. I said, no, it's coming up to my room with me. And they're going, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to ride my bicycle. And they said, you can't. Well, how you can't? You're locked in your room. I said, yeah, I brought my indoor trainer as well. I had a kicker with me. And they said, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to ride. I'm going to sweat this room like you cannot believe. I'm going to train if I'm here for 2 weeks, I'm going to train for 2 weeks. There's no ways. Anyway, I passed out in the morning, but I thought to myself, I'm going to contact the Ministry of Health, because they're the only ones who'd be able to release me from that hotel. And I had all the bloods with me. The worst thing was it was COVID. I phoned them up, waited 60 minutes. They answered the phone line cut. Worst thing ever. I was so angry. I was doing push-ups in my hotel room. I was sit-ups. I was between each call. I phoned 5 times and it kept cutting out. Eventually at 8 o'clock at night, and I'd been there since like 5 in the morning, I was like, no, I'm going to phone again one last time. And now somebody answered and it did not cut off. And this lady was very helpful. And she said, I know exactly what the problem is. You contracted COVID outside of the country. You need to prove this. So all you need to do is find a local doctor, send the bloods, and if he can write a letter saying that he approves it and everything, we can release you from quarantine. So I got a local doctor there, and he approved it, American doctor. He approved the blood testing. He said, Mark is no threat to anybody, signed it off, and basically the next morning I woke up, there was an SMS that says you can be released from quarantine. And that caused hell in the hotel. Why? Because here's the unvaccinated guy that's being released from a quarantine hotel, and everybody else in that hotel had been double vaccinated already, but they had to stay in for 14 days. If they wanted to get out of the hotel, they had to have a third vaccine, and they had to remain 7 days, and then they could be released. But there was me out. And so they followed the science. And so when I saw this, I was like, okay, that's great. And then I came back to SA, and I was like, I wasn't interested in the vaccine whatsoever. So I was quite I wasn't anti the vaccine for people that needed it. I think if you had a health issue, or if there was a problem from that point of view, and you had no protection mechanism, then I think it played a purpose. But I think for somebody like me that really does look after his health and really thought this is not going to happen, and it was fine. And I contracted COVID again after that, Omicron. I was a bit fatigued for a few days and over it. So, and we see now where it is today. I don't know also about the safety effects of things. I don't like putting things in my body which I don't trust. It was developed very rapidly, but I guess it's a completely different part. You know, I'm not a infectious disease or a viral expert, but I do know that I've got an immune system that functions, and that for me was good enough.
Let's talk about your immune system. What do you eat in a day? It's not just pancakes, eh?
No. So look, I mean, obviously, natural food for me is obviously the most important. My diet has had to change as I've aged, because when you're in your 30s or your 40s, you can obviously get away with things. Protein intake doesn't have to be, at such a high level. But I think the biggest thing for me is like a balanced diet. I keep my fat intake between about 15 to 30% total intake. And then I do eat in a mild calorie deficit, a very mild calorie deficit.
Do you track your
Yes,
food?
I do.
Everything? Weigh it, everything?
Well, I don't have to weigh. I can, like the other day I walked into the kitchen, I scooped some Avo, said to one of the kids, that's about 20 grams. He looked at me. threw it on a scale. Said, I told you, it's 20 grams.
20 grams.
You eventually, it's the same with a GPS. Like to me, a track is like a GPS. You've got a destination, you've never been there before. You plug it in the GPS, you drive there maybe once or twice or 3 or 4. Eventually, you get to know the directions. And nutrition's the same. If you stick to a sort of eating regime, but I do believe in calorie tracking because I'm a numbers guy. I love numbers, and I like that because without it, I'm sort of, it's like shooting in the dark. I see it when people come to me and say, I'm battling to lose weight, or I'm battling to gain muscle mass, or I'm battling to drop body fat. And I'm like, well, log your meals. And then they log their meals and I look at it and I'm going, oh,
too much.
Wow, okay. I mean, you're eating healthy, but you're way over eating health. So that's a problem. So I think it's very, very important to make sure that you've got and you don't have to do it constantly, but you need to do it enough that you get an understanding of what you can and can't eat. So with me, look, I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting because I train constantly every single day. And for me, I've got to maximize recovery. At this age in my 50s, recovery is so important. And by delaying the intake of nutrition, you're actually delaying that recovery process. I mean, I trained this morning. I did some severe muscle damage. There's no ways I'm going to delay my protein intake. I want to get amino acids circulating. I want to get that muscle protein synthesizing because tomorrow I'm back at it again. And as you get older, there's a process called sarcopenia, which is degradation of muscle mass over a period of time. Once you're over a certain age, say probably 20s to 30s, you're starting to lose around 10% of your muscle mass per decade. But it's not a linear curve. It's not a linear graph. It's basically, it's like more convex graph. It's actually or we can say concave. As you're getting older, 50s, 60s, 70s, it's like dropping off a cliff edge. So at this age, you need to increase your protein intake significantly. I eat 2.5 to 3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. When I was in my 40s, it was more like 1.6 to 2 grams. Maybe more around 1.6 to 1.8. And so as I've aged, I've had to increase my protein intake because just like somebody might become resistant to, insulin resistant as they age, etc., and they're not able to process glucose as efficiently as they were when they were younger, so too as you get older, I think processing, amino acid processing, circulating amino acids, you might become a little bit less efficient at processing that. And so the protein intake needs to be a little bit higher in order to be able to aid maintaining or increasing lean muscle. And the key to aging healthily is muscle, is absolutely lean muscle. You've got to have strength. You've got to have power. That's going to help. People talk about VO2 max as well. Yes, it is one factor as to healthy aging, but there's a genetic factor with VO2 max. It's not so simple. There's no genetic factors with growing muscle. Everybody can grow muscle. And with VO2, you've got to put yourself in a really painful hurt box process to be able to really grow your VO2. And I say once you hit a peak VO2 at a certain age, eventually it's very hard to maintain as you get older. But one thing you can maintain and keep working on is muscle mass.
Awesome. Well, that's one of the questions. How important is weight training?
Very important. I would say most important once you mid-40s heading towards your 50s. In your 50s and 60s, I don't care what kind of an endurance athlete you are. If you're not doing strength at least 3 to 5 times a week, you're just wasting your time because you're not doing muscle damage when you're running or when you're cycling. You're just not. And in actual fact, I read a scientific research study recently which said that if you like cycling and you're doing overgearing and you think that's strength training, waste of time now. They're saying like compound lifting and plyometrics, the combination will make you a much stronger cyclist, but overgearing is not going to do it for you. And so we see with a lot of professional athletes these days, they incorporate very stringent, maybe more functional strength training sessions into their regime. And strength is very, very important. It's very important. It's the most important.
If you can do one exercise for the remainder of your life, what would it be?
One exercise. I would choose strength over endurance, funny enough. Even though I'm an endurance athlete, if I was going to live a longer, healthier life, I would say strength is the bricks and mortar, it's the foundation. Obviously, I love both. So I blend strength and endurance. But if I wake up in the morning and it's a choice between strength and run. I will, and I don't have the time to do both. I will take the strength session over the run. I'll fit the run in another time, but I don't want to miss the strength session.
It's important.
Yeah.
Are you as strict with the family on eating as you are with
I
yourself?
try to be.
Okay.
Between my wife and I, there's 5 children. And to be honest, there's...
They also ripped as you.
No, it's spilled off. The education is spilled off. My wife's very, very good at it. She's a very clean eater. She eats a lower fat, also a sort of higher protein carb diet, but she knows what works for her. And she really, sometimes I say she even eats cleaner than me. Sometimes. But we eat the same foods, which is actually quite nice. We eat similar things. We can go out for dinner. We don't like going out for dinner. We prefer home cooked meals. She always says that my food is way better than a restaurant, so I'll take it. But you know, like if I go to a restaurant, like if I'm gonna have like a chicken breast and they grill it, I tell them, do not put oil on because it will kill my stomach. I come from a family with digestive disorders.
Jeez.
You know, I had a mucous diverticulum removed when I was 12 years old, so irritable bowel. I've got a mother that suffers from Crohn's disease, and you know I've seen it also with other family that's got Crohn's. I think that you know when you've got a condition, don't gaslight it. Don't go and flare it up. You've got the ability to control it and to work on it.
So there's no seed oils or nothing with you?
No, seed oils I think are healthy. Actually, there's no problem. The scientific evidence has shown that seed oils actually lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, and there's so many people are anti-seed oil, and you get so many people that are so anti-saturated fats. And I'm like, well, I think that you need to find a balance. I once read a book which was actually quite amazing, which is WTF Should I Eat by Dr. Mark Heyman, who, I don't know if you know him, he's a functional medicine doctor, quite amazing. And he wrote in this book, when he says, I always get asked what's the best diet, and he said it's a pagan diet. He said paleo vegan. He said it doesn't matter whether you're more plant-based or whether you're more paleo-based or whether you find something in between. He says, always make sure whatever you eat is the cleanest of what you can eat, you know? So if you're eating meat, make sure that the meat's clean as possible. If you're eating plants, make sure that they're also clean as possible and try and find that balance. I quite like that. But, you know, I mean, look, I've got no problem with oils. I think some are very highly processed, which I stay away from. But I think you've got to look at I'm not a normal human being. Like, if you're an endurance athlete, and I know endurance athletes or maybe strength and endurance, or now, you know, CrossFitters or high rocks athletes, every single day these guys wake up, and girls wake up and they train. That's less than 0.01% of the world's population, maybe even smaller than that. They are not normal human beings. Most human beings do not get up in the early hours of the morning and go and put their bodies through physical torture for long-term life pleasure, you know, or for health. And so when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to a lot of the studies across various cohorts, I think it's very important to understand that they're not done on our very unique sector of the population. They don't just take this 0.001% and say, okay, we're going to study these people. They don't. They study a very broad population. And we've seen that with a lot of studies. So it's very difficult to measure. So just as a simple example, I read a research study. It actually was a meta-analysis where they showed that from a health perspective, it would be better. US dietary guidelines look at fat at being like 35% of total dietary intake. They were saying that maybe you want to have the fat at 30% or under. That's nice from a health perspective. The reason being is they're finding that the risk of long-term illness, things like cancer, things like lifestyle diseases, diabetes, all these kinds of things can come into play. They found when the percentage of fat intake was a lot higher. But then you've got to think, okay, what was the cohort? You know, what did they study in this group? And you look at it and you say, oh, wow. Okay, these are just normal everyday people. These are people that eat fast foods, French fries, dipped in oil that's been sitting there for I don't know how many days. They go out and they eat burgers and they eat KFC and they're eating McDonald's and whatever it is, they're eating a lot of different foods. So you look at those fats and you think, man, but in those fats, it's not just saturated and unsaturated fats. You're looking at a lot of trans fats in there and really highly processed fats, and those can have a very direct impact on your health long term. So if you are sticking to clean fats, whether it's saturated or unsaturated fats, are you really going to be falling part of that study? And the answer is no. Okay. So, but I am personally a fan of making sure that from a dietary intake perspective, the highest percentage of fats that I eat are obviously unsaturated. From a point of cardiovascular health, I eat very little saturated fat. In actual fact, if I eat cottage cheese or cream cheese or whatever, I go for a fat-free. If I go with yogurt, I go for a fat-free because my focus is really protein. Predominantly, I keep to unsaturated fats, and I'd say maybe 10% of my fat intake would be saturated. And that's just purely from a cardiovascular perspective, just from a health perspective. I also feel a lot better when I eat more unsaturated fats in my diet. But most of my unsaturated fats come from things like avocado, maybe olive oil, things like that, tahini, which is sesame seed paste, so those are mainly the sort of fats that I eat. So my diet is really protein centric. Because I need to make sure that I get in a right amount of protein to be able to recover and repair damaged muscle fiber on a day-to-day basis. And then the rest of the meal is built around that. And those are my energy foods, because carbs and fats are both energy foods. If I'm going to train hard and I'm going to push myself for longer, carbohydrate intake will be on the upper end and fat will be a little bit down. On days where, maybe I don't train as hard, maybe a bit more of a recovery day or an easier day, maybe my carb intake will come down, fat intake will come slightly up, so that there's a bit of a balance. But everything for me is protein centric. And then I like to make them nutrient dense. Different colors, different textures, high in fiber. All these things are very beneficial from a health perspective.
Fruits?
I think fruits and vegetables are amazing. Yeah, absolutely. People say fruits are high in sugar, but so what? They've got good fiber, they've got water, they've got everything. They've got antioxidants. I actually eat a fairly high carbohydrate diet. I'm not sitting here and worried about, gaining weight. I run bloods on myself, obviously, as you know, I run them very regularly. So, I'll monitor health markers.
What are you testing there usually? So
look, I run bloods usually, I run a panel usually like every 3 months. And it gives me a good baseline. So, baselining over, I think I've got 16 or 17 years of bloods. But if there's an anomaly, at least you can see. Funny enough, there's no history of cholesterol in my family. My father was a diabetic, so, but that was more, I'd say, lifestyle choices. And that was terrible to watch, terrible. He passed away 2 years ago, but it was just it's a terrible disease to watch how you deteriorate over time, especially if you don't control and manage it. I baseline certain bloods, so I look at metabolic health markers. So there, you would look at things like blood glucose, fasted insulin, looking at HbA1c, which is a bit more of a key measure. You can look at also cardiovascular risk. Obviously they're looking at sort of cholesterol, APOB, which is apolipoprotein B, which is something else, you can have a look at to see, maybe if you've got slightly high cholesterol, but what are the risks of that actually attaching to a protein and actually causing a blockage? And there's a lot of different kinds. Then you can run hormone panels. I actually see a lot of endurance athletes with lower hormones, and I think that's quite key. And even when they're young, you see that high volume endurance sport can lower testosterone levels in a man. It can impact you quite negatively. You're elevating cortisol, stress as well. A lot of people working long hours and trying to be pro athletes when they're not pro athletes. So a lot of these things are impacted, and you get to see them in all this blood. So if I ran hormone tests on myself, it would only be once every maybe 6 months or so. Full blood counts that I don't run regularly because generally they're okay. So maybe also I'll run that every 6 months. But like every 3 months, it would be like a different batch of blood. Sometimes I run my vitamin D levels. Sometimes cholesterol I don't run very often. I've never had any issues. Once it was slightly elevated and I was looking, that's crazy. Like if I look at it's never ever happened. Did I eat something before the test? Did I have something? And then I thought, you know what, I'll just focus on just watching my fat intake over the next couple of weeks, and then I'll rerun the test 4 weeks later. I reran the test 4 weeks later, it was back down again. So maybe it's just an anomaly and I didn't have to worry about it, but I always believe in a traffic light system. It's either green, orange, or red. I want everything to be green. If it's orange, you want to switch it back to green. If it's red, stop everything. You need to get that red thing checked and fixed. And that might require the input of a physician or a specialist or whatever it is, but don't leave it, because when you add exercise on top of a condition, you're exaggerating it. You're putting more stress on the body, and the body's not going to withstand it.
How bad is alcohol for you?
I think it's very bad. I know everybody says in moderation, but I think the research that's been done on alcohol lately, and there's a lot of research studies, and now we're seeing historical data coming over very long periods of time, and we're seeing some meta-analysis coming over time, over studies that are done over not 1 or 2 or 3 years, but even decades. And we're seeing now that alcohol is not good for you. If you look, as you age, I think it's going to have a higher impact on you. I think definitely when you're younger, your body's got this ability to obviously be more efficient at getting rid of toxins and that. But alcohol is a toxin. It's toxicity to the body. I always say to people, when you eat food, whether it's carbohydrates, protein, fats, there's sort of like we call it an order of processing. And carbs are very quickly accessible. They're ultimately converted into glucose and then eventually either taken up by the mitochondria or utilized, for energy. But if not, ultimately they can be converted into fat at some stage and then stored. Fat is either going to be used or stored, and then protein just takes a very long time to be processed within the digestive system. In actual fact, high protein diets actually elevate metabolic rate slightly because protein just forces the digestive system to work that much harder to break it down. But when you introduce alcohol now, it's like the body says, hey, we got to get rid of this stuff first. Like put everything on hold. This is bad stuff. We got to get rid of this substance. So it is a toxin to the body. I know people say, it takes off the edge, it takes off this. But so does exercise take off the edge, So does a good stack of pancakes. But I would have a glass of wine once in a while. Funny enough, I've got an allergy to sulfur, and sometimes the sulfites in wine, they can hit me. I just find it drops my blood pressure, and I realized that even just one glass of wine, I'm absolutely finished. So I even stopped that. And I feel a lot better for it, but for me, it was like a glass of wine once every couple of weeks or every couple of months. Some people drink wine all the time or beers all the time. But I think there's options. I went overseas with my son. We went climbing around Mont Blanc for a couple of days. I went to French Alps last year. It was amazing. And one of the days we spent 7.5 hours on the mountain, and we were finished afterwards. Unfortunately, when we got to the top, to the one, we went to Lake Blanc, and there's a beautiful little restaurant and everything, and they were making French crepes. And I'm like, okay, let's grab one. You've been doing so much exercise, you need the fuel. And unfortunately, they said, no, we don't take card, only cash. And I'm like, I didn't bring euros up the mountain with me. My son was so miserable. So we filled up our bottles with some glacier water, and we went down to the station, and the food there wasn't even great either. So when we got back to the town, we drove past a pizzeria, and I said to him, we're going to get pizza. We got a pizza. And while we were standing there, he says to me, the guy offers us, says, don't you guys want a beer while you're waiting? And I'm like, I don't drink beer. But my son says to me, come on, Dad, you've got to drink a beer. So I look in the fridge and I see, there's a Peroni alcohol free. So I drank it, and you know what? You still get the same taste. You don't need the buzz, but it was actually quite nice, just to have something that was like a little bit, like a more of a savory taste than anything else. And I must say I enjoyed it. But again, when you go to Europe and you standing on the biggest triathlons in the world, like Roth, Erdinger, which is a big beer company in Germany, sponsor a lot of these events, but you get alcohol free. And people say it's not the same, but the taste is the same. The feeling might not be the same.
Definitely. What is most important to you in your life?
Look, obviously family is the most important, but health is very, very important. And I think it's the most important for everyone. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to give the best of yourself to those around you that you love or you care about, if you're not well, if you wake up not well, it impacts your mood. It can impact your energy levels. I talk simply, like if you get a flu or some kind of a cold or some kind of an infection, you feel miserable when you wake up in the morning. It's not like you're going to walk around with a smile on your face and go like, I'm going to hug everybody and be loving, and you feel miserable. You're frustrated. You're irritated, and I think so that with everything in life, health is actually the underlying factor of determining happiness. There's a saying, not my saying. I mean, there was an expression that I read which says, in order to be happy in life, you need to have hope. But in order to have hope, you need to have health. Without health, there's no hope. With health, only is there hope. Because when you don't have your health, and I mentioned this to an athlete once, because he said to me once, Mark, I know how you focus on health and this and that. And I said to him, you know what the problem is with you? His name is Tabang. I said, you know what the problem is with you, Tabang? I said, you've never really, he's young. I said, you've never really had a severe illness in your life. And I said, so for you, health is taken for granted. Like every day you wake up, you think you're going to be healthy, and thank God you are healthy. But the one time, and it will happen, the one time where you're not healthy, where something does crop up and you have lost your health, you will shut everything off around you and you will do every single thing in your power to get your health back. And even when it comes down to business success or financial success, you can't go be sitting there in front of a stock market and trading when you're sick. You're not going to be able to focus properly. You're going to feel miserable, and I can't sit and speak to people if I'm ill and be happy. I'm sitting here talking to you. If I was sick today, the conversation might have gone completely differently.
Definitely.
But yeah, so like I say, I think friends, family is the most important, but without health, you can't give the best of yourself. And so that really does become the underlying factor.
Are you afraid of anything?
I used to be afraid of heights until I had to build a tree house. I was a scout. I had to build a tree house up in a tree, and I had to overcome my fear very quickly. Look, I think everybody's got fear. I'm actually a bit of a control freak. I don't like the unknown. I like to control things. Like, there's checks and balances in place. That's why I run bloods. That's why I watch what I eat. There's no guarantees in life. I can walk across the road tomorrow and be hit by a bus. But I think the fear of unknown is something that, is something for me. Is like I'm like one of these people that I like to look ahead and try and sort of, it's like a game of chess. You make a move, and how's that going to affect you in the future? Look, I think the one thing that also I'm afraid of is I'm definitely afraid that the illness that I had when I was much younger, which I've suppressed, it's sitting dormant. But I'm always afraid that thing will resurface again. Because I know that, I know how I felt in those years. It took about 8 years to really get control of that. And I know that you cannot function like a normal human being when you're not well. And so for me, it is a fear, because then I can't give of myself, and I don't want to have to deal with something like that. So that's always in the back of my mind. Whenever I used to get a flu infection or I just feel man down, it could have been a simple 2 or 3 day bug. But the minute it hit me, I would think, man, this thing's back to haunt me. And sometimes I was completely wrong, and sometimes I was actually right. But eventually it started to be more and more suppressed, and then eventually it was like, but I never take it for granted. It's always in the back of my mind, can this thing come back? And I'm always sitting there waiting.
Eesh. What's next for 32 GI?
Look, we've got a lot of new products that are coming down the line that I've been working on with development. It takes time, because once we've sort of once it's been conceptualized and agreed on and sort of lab developed, then it has to be, it has to go to the manufacturers. We need to get obviously samples from them. Then I need to dish it out to the athletes. Then we need to get proper testing and feedback. I always test the products myself because I want to know exactly how I'm feeling, taste, texture, convenience. Everything has to work for me. If it doesn't work for me, I won't even give it to the athletes. But once I'm happy, then I'll give it out to the athletes. And I don't have much of a very sweet tooth. So what you'll find is with the athletes, they're like, oh, I want it sweeter, I want the different flavor or whatever it is. But that's fine. That's very easy stuff to work on. But yeah, so we've got a number of products that are coming down the line. And yeah, we're just trying to do what we do best, is carry on educating, carry on growing the business. Obviously, it would be nicer to grow, our international exports as much as possible. At the moment, in South Africa, we're quite a dominant brand in the endurance space, and we just want to carry on seeing growth in that sphere. We are seeing a lot of changes within the industry as far as like how endurance and strength, being completely two separate silos, are actually starting to merge. We see strength athletes doing endurance. We see endurance athletes starting to take on strength and are starting to see these two sort of silos merge into one. And we're seeing that now. You're seeing like High Rocks, for example. People come from a strength background. They're not from endurance, and they go to High Rocks. And I'm like, man, that is an endurance event through and through. Yeah, there's a strength angle, but 8x1000s is not easy. It is not easy. So what we're going to see, I think, is actually there's going to be a lot of sort of cross between strength and endurance as we move ahead. I think running is definitely still the biggest growing sport in the world. We see it. If you have a look even at the Big Five marathons, it's not going to be Big Five anymore. Australia's coming on board now, and then soon Cape Town, Sanlam. So marathon distance growing numbers completely all the time. Comrades this year, 24,000 runners, and it's going to grow. It's crazy to think about it. To think 24,000 people are going to run a 90K ultra. Take my hat off to them. It's amazing. It's crazy. But and some of the people that you would least expect to do it, they're just going to do it. I've got a friend who's at the gym who's quite an avid cyclist. He's been cycling for many, many, many years. And last year or the year before, he just decided, I'm going to do a Comrades. So he dropped his bike to start running. It couldn't have been easy for him. Very, very difficult. But he went and he completed his first Comrades. And now he's doing his back-to-back. He's going on his second Comrades.
Awesome. Wow.
And that was a pure cyclist. So I think there's a lot of sort of people moving from one discipline to another, and we're seeing this starting to sort of merge. So what was like pure strength, I think, is starting to have a portion of endurance to it, and what was sort of pure endurance is starting to mix up with the different disciplines and move a little bit more into strength.
Mark, last question.
Yeah.
How would you like to be remembered one day?
Sure. Hopefully in a good way. Look, you know what? If I've contributed to, I think for me, my whole thing is I like to change people's lives for the better. And that's from a health perspective mainly. I do work with a lot of people that have got health issues. And these are athletes with health issues. Some with severe bone density issues, some with illnesses, some with autoimmunes. And I've seen some of them succeed amazingly. Yes, there's been setbacks, there's challenges, but amazingly. But if I can put people on that journey, on that road to health, if they can live long, healthy, active lifestyles, and I've had a part to play in supporting them and getting them there, that's how I'd want to be remembered, is actually helping improve people's lives. When people say to me, like, what do you do? I think for me, it's more preventative health. I'll send you to the doctor when you're healthy, not when you're sick. A lot of people go to the doctors or they go to physicians when they're sick. That's because they're forced to go. And I'm saying take control, take charge. Preventative health is best. Get your testing done, get your bloods done, go to the cardiologist, get a heart ultrasound, do a stress ECG, whatever you need to be doing to protect and fortify your health. My aim is to try and get people on that sort of journey. I'm trying to write a book. I've been trying for so long. I need to finish this thing. Hopefully I'll get it done. I told my partner last year, but we're back in 2025. But so I believe that in life, you hit a fork in the road, and that fork is either going to go left or right, and you've really got to choose. You can go left, which is not the path you really want to take, because that's the path of you're not really taking control or looking after your health. And I can promise you, and this is based on my experience, and I've seen this with the baby boomer generation and some of the next generation coming up, which is actually my generation, which I think we're Gen Z. So if we have a look at how have people have aged over time and the sort of the illnesses that have experienced, we see that fork in the road to the left side is where you are becoming the $1 billion customer for the pharmaceutical industry. And the $1 billion customer for the pharmaceutical industry means that they want to keep you that $1 billion customer. So what does that mean? It means you might be in and out of hospital or backwards and forwards to a doctor, or you might have some dependency on a prophylactic treatment, whether it's pills to control blood pressure or cholesterol or whatever it is. You are the $1 billion customer, and they will keep you alive for as long as they possibly can, because once you're no longer here, they've lost their $1 billion customer. And that's what I call decades of suffering, because it is suffering. I think that humans are going to live to 100 and beyond. I see lifespan definitely increasing, and that's mainly because of medical technology, and there's a lot of amazing discoveries in science and medicine that continuously are taking place all the time. And so I always say to people, do you want to live to 100 like a 100-year-old, suffering maybe for the last third of your life? Because you could suffer for the last third of your life. Maybe even you could suffer for the last half of your life. That's not a way to live. You want to live a very healthy, active life. So the fork in the road is, do I just go with the flow and carry on doing what I'm doing, or do I really start to focus on health? And then go the right fork. And the right fork is you become more of a bankruptcy case for pharma. Not that that will ever happen, but you start to take control of your health, you look after it, and you live to 100 like a 20-year-old. That's the path that you should be taking. 100 like a 20-year-old is an expression I use because I truly believe that people have the ability to... It is possible. There's a lot of checks and balances that need to be put in place. You need to focus on your sleep. You need to focus on exercise. You can't overdo things. You need to focus on nutrition. You've got to have preventative testing and markers in place. You want to control everything. And it doesn't mean you have to be obsessive compulsive, but you need to do the right things and things in moderation, because yes, you do have to enjoy life. People say to me, how do you enjoy life? You're too serious. No, actually, I love life. I just respect health more because I lost it when I was very young, and I don't want to lose it again. I don't want to suffer. I know what that's like. So if I can get thousands, hundreds of thousands, million people on that right fork, then that's the way I would want to be remembered, because then I've really done something to change people's lives, and that's something that's good enough for me. I like to see people succeed, but I really like to see people succeed also from a health perspective, because that's the most important.
Well, you're an inspiration. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Mark. It was really good to be on. Thank you very much.
Good.